The first thing Seren noticed about the Alpha King was that he did not look at people when they spoke to him. He looked past them, through them, as if their words were wind and he was stone. She stood at the foot of the council table with dirt still under her fingernails and the scent of blackroot clinging to her sleeves, and she watched him ignore her with the practiced ease of a man who had never needed to listen to anyone beneath him in his entire life. She had not asked to be here. A steward named Davarin had pulled her from her work in the lower orchards that morning, insisting that someone with knowledge of soil rot was needed before the council. The outer farmlands were dying, the harvests growing thinner each year, and the Crown's appointed wardens had accomplished nothing. So they had sent for her. Seren Vale, a soil mender with no title and no business, standing in a room full of men who owned more land than she would see in 10 lifetimes. She told them what she knew. She spoke clearly, carefully, the way Mistress Orla had taught her. She explained how the rot worked, how it moved through root systems in patterns that mimicked infection, how the standard treatments of burning and salting were making it worse because the blight fed on scorched earth. She described the remediation techniques she had been developing on her own small plot outside the capital walls. The soil could be healed if they stopped poisoning it and started listening to what it needed. She was mid-sentence when the king raised one hand. The gesture was small, lazy, barely a flick of the wrist. But it silenced the room like a blade. Alpha King Kalen Draith finally looked at her. His eyes were the color of winter iron, pale gray with no warmth in them at all. He was younger than she had expected, maybe 27 or 28, but his face carried the kind of hard authority that aged a man beyond his years. Dark hair fell across his forehead, and the breadth of his shoulders beneath his coat was almost absurd. He was built like something designed to break other things. He studied her for a long, uncomfortable moment. His eyes dropped to her hands, to the soil embedded in the creases of her knuckles, to the patched hem of her work dress, to the scuffed boots she had not had time to change out of. His lip curled, not quite a sneer, something worse. Dismissal. "Who brought her here?" he asked. He did not ask her. He asked the room. Davarin shifted on his feet. "Sire, Miss Vile has demonstrated considerable expertise in soil remediation along the eastern—" "She is a dirt farmer," the king said. His voice was quiet, almost bored. "She tends a quarter-acre outside the wall, and presumes to lecture my council on crown lands she has never set foot on." The silence that followed was the loudest thing Seren had ever heard. Heat crawled up her neck and into her face. Every pair of eyes in the room was on her, and not one of them held anything resembling sympathy. "Your Majesty," she started, her voice thinner than she wanted it to be. "The techniques I described are proven. If your wardens would allow me to demonstrate on even a small section of the affected territory, I could show you within a single growing season that—" "Know your place." The words landed like a closed fist. The king did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He said it the way someone might correct a dog that had climbed onto furniture it did not belong on. Quiet, final, uninterested in argument. A counselor to his left let out a short breath that might have been a laugh. Another shook his head slowly, the way men do when they are embarrassed on someone else's behalf. Seren's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against her thighs and held the king's gaze for one more second. 2, 3. He had already looked away. She was already forgotten. The guard at the door stepped forward and gestured toward the corridor. She barely remembered walking out. She remembered the sound of the heavy doors closing behind her, and the way the wood groaned in its frame. And she remembered standing in the empty hallway with her pulse hammering and her vision blurring and a taste in her mouth like iron. She did not cry. She stood there in that cold corridor with her back against the stone wall, and her fists clenched so tight her nails bit into her palms. And something shifted inside her chest. Not sadness, not shame. Something harder, something with teeth. They had sent for her because they were desperate, and the king had thrown her out because she was nobody, small and quiet and useful when convenient and invisible when not. Orla had taken her in as a child when no one else would, had taught her everything about the soil and the growing things. Seren had poured herself into that knowledge because it was the only thing that was truly hers. She unclenched her fists, looked down at her dirt-stained hands. Then she pushed off the wall and walked away from the palace. She did not look back. The walk back to her plot took the better part of 2 hours. The capital, Thornhold, sprawled outward from the palace in widening rings of stone and timber, growing shabbier and more crowded the farther you got from the center. Seren lived beyond the outermost wall, past the last of the merchant stalls and the tanneries that stank of lye, in a small cottage that sat on a 1/4 acre of land she had inherited from Orla. Orla was waiting for her on the porch. The old woman had a way of knowing when things had gone badly. She did not ask what happened. She took one look at Seren's face and went inside to put the kettle on. Seren sat at the scarred kitchen table and told her everything. The council chamber, the blight reports, the king's voice when he said know your place, the look on his face when he saw her hands. She described the counselor who had almost laughed, the steward Devorin who had looked at the floor, and the guard who had walked her to the corridor like he was disposing of something unpleasant. Orla listened without interrupting, her weathered fingers wrapped around her cup. When Seren finished, the old woman was quiet for a long time. Not the kind of quiet that meant she was thinking of what to say. The kind of quiet that meant she already knew and was deciding how much to reveal. "How bad is the blight?" Orla asked finally. Seren blinked. She had expected comfort, maybe outrage, not a technical question. "Bad," she said. "Worse than what they told the council. I could smell it on the steward who came for me. That deep, sour rot that gets into everything. The outer fields are gone. If they keep burning and salting the way they have been, they will lose the middle ring within a year. Maybe sooner." Orla nodded slowly. "And the palace grounds?" "Not yet. But the blight is moving inward. It follows the water table. If it reaches the aquifer beneath the palace hill, there will be nothing anyone can do." Orla set down her cup with a deliberateness that made Seren's stomach tighten. "There is something I should have told you a long time ago," she said. Seren went still. Orla's voice had changed. The warmth was gone. What remained was careful and deliberate, the voice of someone choosing words they had rehearsed in their mind for years. "Your mother was not a stranger who left you on my doorstep," Orla said. "She was my daughter. I am your grandmother." The room seemed to tilt. Seren gripped the edge of the table. Her mouth opened, but no words came. All the years of wondering, of lying awake as a child constructing faces for parents she had never met, of telling herself it did not matter because Orla was enough, and all of it collapsed inward like a building with its foundations pulled away. Orla raised a hand. "Let me finish. My daughter Veska had a gift. The same one you have, the connection to the soil, the ability to feel what the land needs. It runs in our bloodline. But Veska also had ambitions. She petitioned the old king, Kaelin's father, for stewardship of the crown lands east of the palace, unclaimed territory that had been fallow for decades." "What happened?" Seren managed. "He laughed at her," Orla said. "The court laughed. She was humiliated, much as you were today. The shame broke something in her. She left Thornhold shortly after and never came back. She sent you to me when you were barely a month old with a letter that said she could not raise a child in a kingdom that would teach her daughter she was worthless." Seren's eyes burned. She blinked hard and pressed her fingers against the table until the wood grain bit into her skin. "But Veska was stubborn, even in defeat," Orla continued. "Before she left, she found the old laws, the original charters from the founding. There is a provision, Crown territory that has been abandoned and left unproductive for more than 5 years can be claimed by any citizen who restores it to productive use within 3 consecutive growing seasons. Siren gaped at her. That cannot be real. It is real. It has never been invoked because no one has ever been foolish enough to try. The abandoned crown lands are dead earth. Nothing grows there. Every warden the crown has sent has failed. Orla paused, and her gaze sharpened. But you and I both know the earth is not dead. It is sick. And you know how to heal it. Siren's mind was racing. The abandoned parcels, she said slowly. They surround the palace on 3 sides. Hundreds of acres. If someone restored them under the old charter, they would own them, Orla finished. Legally, irrevocably. The crown itself could not take them back. Siren sat very still, her heart hammered hard enough to pulse in her throat. Grandmother, she said, and the word felt strange and right in her mouth all at once. Why did you wait until now to tell me this? Orla's eyes were bright and fierce. Because until today, you still believed that knowing your place meant accepting the one other people gave you. That night, Siren could not sleep. She lay on her narrow cot and stared at the ceiling and thought about dead earth and old laws and a king who could not be bothered to look at her when she spoke. She thought about her mother, Veska, who had tried and been laughed at and had walked away, who had carried the knowledge of what was possible and had chosen exile over another fight she did not believe she could win. Siren lay there and felt the ache in her chest, not just for herself, but for a woman she had never known who had loved her enough to send her somewhere safe and had been too broken to stay. She rolled onto her side. Through the window she could see the distant outline of the palace on its hill, lit by torches that burned all night. Know your place, the king had said. Fine, she thought. I will. She rose before dawn the next morning and began. The first season was brutal. The abandoned crown lands east of the palace were exactly as dead as everyone believed. Siren walked the territory for 3 full days before she even began working, mapping the damage with her hands and her nose, and the deep instinct that Orla called the listening. The soil was not merely barren, it was wounded, compacted and stripped of every living organism, scorched repeatedly by wardens who believed fire was a cure rather than a poison. The water table beneath it had turned acidic. Nothing could root and ground this hostile, but Siren could feel something beneath the damage, a pulse, faint and slow, like a heartbeat buried under rubble. The land wanted to live. It had simply forgotten how. She filed the petition on the 7th day. The clerk at the records office stared at her like she had spoken in a foreign language. He consulted 3 separate volumes before confirming that yes, the old charter provision existed, and yes, it had never been invoked, and yes, she was technically within her rights to claim restoration stewardship of abandoned crown territory. He stamped the documents with a bewildered expression and wished her luck in a tone that suggested she would need a miracle instead. Siren did not need a miracle. She needed time, patience, and an unreasonable amount of compost. She began with the easternmost parcel, a stretch of cracked gray earth that bordered the forest. She worked alone, from dawn until her hands bled, breaking up the compacted layers with hand tools because she could not afford a plow. She hauled river mud from the creek bed a mile south and mixed it with decomposed leaf litter from the forest floor. She planted cover crops that could tolerate acidic soil. Clover first, then mustard, then buckwheat in rotation. Things that would fix nitrogen back into the ground and begin rebuilding the microbial networks that fire had destroyed. Nothing happened for weeks. The earth sat there, indifferent and gray, and Siren worked it anyway. She talked to it sometimes, which she would never have admitted to anyone except Orla. She pressed her hands into the dirt and told it what she needed. Told it she was not going to burn it again. Told it she was sorry for what had been done. Then, on the 23rd day, the first green shoots broke through. Seren knelt in the dirt and pressed her palm flat against the earth and felt tears burn in her eyes. Something in her chest opened up. Not relief exactly. Recognition. The land had heard her. It was answering. Orla helped when she could, but the old woman's joints were failing and she tired quickly. Seren did the heavy work alone. She rose before the sun and returned after it set. Her hands cracked and bled. Her shoulders ached constantly. She lost weight she could not afford to lose. Some nights she fell asleep at the kitchen table with her head on her arms, too exhausted to make it to her cot. But the land responded. Slowly, stubbornly, like a sick animal learning to trust the hand that fed it. The cover crop spread. The soil darkened from dead gray to living brown. The earthworms returned first. Then the beetles. Then the birds that followed the insects. By the end of the first season, the easternmost parcel had a living carpet of green clover thick enough to walk on barefoot. The second season, she expanded to the northern parcels. Word had spread among the people who lived outside the walls, laborers and farmers and other disposable folk the crown did not think about. A handful of them came to watch. Then a handful more came to help. A young wolf named Tareth appeared one morning and started hauling river mud without being asked. He barely spoke. He worked steadily and left at dusk and returned the next day. Then came a woman named Brea with her 2 adolescent sons. Then an elderly man named Colum, who knew more about water management than anyone Seren had ever met. Then more, and more, after that. By the middle of the second season, she had a crew of 15. By the end of it, 30. They were not working for her exactly. They were working for the land, because they could see it coming back. And the sight of dead earth turning green again was the kind of thing that made people believe in possibilities they had stopped considering. Serene noticed something else too, something she did not mention to Orla or Tareth or anyone. The deeper she pushed into the dead lands, the closer she got to the palace hill, the worse the soil became. Not just blighted. Wrong. There was a sourness in the earth near the palace that felt different from ordinary rot. It felt intentional, like the land itself was recoiling from something at its center. She filed that observation away and kept working. There would be time to understand it later. First, she had a kingdom to outmaneuver. The palace noticed. It started with a land warden on horseback who rode out to the eastern parcel, circled it twice, and rode back without speaking to anyone. Then a clerk from the records office appeared with a thick folder of documents and a series of increasingly pointed questions about the legitimacy of Seren's petition. She showed him the original charter provision, stamped and dated. He went pale and left. Then came the summons. Not from the king himself. From his chancellor, a thin, precise man named Lord Merrick, who managed the crown's territorial affairs. The letter was formal and cold. Miss Vale was required to present herself before the chancellor's office to discuss the status of her activities on crown-adjacent territory. Seren read the letter twice. Then she folded it carefully and tucked it into her apron pocket. She did not go. A second letter arrived 3 days later, sharper in tone. She did not go to that one either. On the 5th day, Lord Merrick himself rode out to the northern parcel. He dismounted with the careful distaste of a man stepping into something unpleasant and picked his way across the field to where Seren was elbow-deep in a drainage trench. "Miss Vale," he said, looking down at her. "Lord Merrick," she replied, not looking up. "You have ignored 2 formal summons from the Chancellor's office." "I have been busy." His jaw tightened. "You are occupying crown land without authorization." Seren straightened, wiped her hands on her trousers, and met his gaze. "I am restoring abandoned crown territory under Article 12 of the founding charter. My petition was filed, reviewed, and stamped by your own records office. The land has been fallow for over a decade. By law, I have 3 growing seasons to demonstrate productive restoration, after which full title transfers to me. Permanently. Lord Merrick held her gaze, and she could see the calculations happening behind his eyes, the irritation giving way to something that looked uncomfortably close to alarm. "The king will hear of this," he said finally. Seren nodded. "I imagine he will." The king heard of it 6 weeks later, which told Seren a great deal about how seriously the palace took anything happening outside its walls. Kaelin Draith, Alpha King of the Thornhold Territories, ruler of every acre from the Ashwood to the Northern Sea, did not concern himself with land petitions filed by dirt farmers until the dirt farmer owned 3 sides of his home. The summons came directly from the crown this time, a royal seal, heavy cream parchment, language that left no room for refusal. Seren was to present herself at the palace for a formal hearing regarding her territorial claims. She dressed carefully. Not in finery, because she owned none, but she washed the soil from beneath her nails and braided her dark hair and wore the cleanest shirt she had. Orla watched her from the doorway of the cottage, her expression unreadable. "Remember," the old woman said, "you have the law. He has the crown. The law is older." The council chamber was exactly as she remembered it. The same long table, the same heavy chairs, the same banner-draped walls that smelled of old stone and older power. But this time, Seren was not standing at the foot of the table with dirt on her hands and an apology in her throat. This time, she was standing at the foot of the table with a leather satchel full of documents and a heartbeat that was steady as a drum. The king was already seated, his attention fixed on the table. Good, she thought. Let him not look. Let him ignore her for as long as he wanted. It did not change what was written on the papers in her bag. Lord Merrick presented the situation in clipped sentences. A citizen had invoked an ancient charter provision. Abandoned crownlands had been under active restoration for nearly 2 growing seasons. The legal standing appeared valid. When Merrick finished, Kaelin raised his gaze and found Seren. Recognition was immediate, a flicker of surprise followed by something harder. He remembered her. "You," he said. "Me," Seren replied. A murmur rippled through the counselors. One did not address the Alpha King with single-syllable defiance. One especially did not do so while standing in borrowed boots on a borrowed carpet in a room full of men who could have her removed with a gesture. Kaelin leaned back in his chair. His gray eyes were fixed on her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "You have been farming my land," he said. "I have been healing your land," Seren corrected. "There is a difference. Your land was dead. Your wardens failed to revive it. I did not." No one spoke. The quiet in the room was sharp enough to cut. Lord Merrick cleared his throat. "Miss Vale, perhaps a more diplomatic—" "The eastern parcel has full ground cover for the first time in 11 years," Seren continued, ignoring the Chancellor entirely. She opened her satchel and spread her documentation across the table. Soil analyses, growth records, yield projections. The northern parcels are 60% restored. By the end of the 3rd season, I will have met every requirement of Article 12, at which point the title transfers to me, permanently. She looked directly at the king. "Your palace will be surrounded on 3 sides by my land." The counselor to the king's left let out a strangled sound. Another one began flipping urgently through a volume of territorial law. The room buzzed with the particular energy of powerful men realizing they had been outmaneuvered by someone they had never considered a threat. Kaelin was motionless. He ignored his counselors, his chancellor. He looked at Seren, and something shifted behind his eyes. Not anger exactly. Something sharper. Something more dangerous. Interest. "You have been working this land for nearly 2 years," he said slowly. "Alone. Not alone. There are people outside your walls who still believe in what the earth can do. They helped. And you did this because you care so deeply about soil remediation," the king said, his voice dropping lower. "Or because I embarrassed you in this room and you wanted to prove something?" The question hung in the air between them. Every person in the chamber was holding their breath. Seren held his gaze. Her pulse was racing now, but she would not look away. She would never look away from him again. "Both," she said. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, something involuntary and quickly suppressed, like a reflex he had not authorized. "Leave us," Kaelin said. The counselors exchanged glances. Lord Merrick opened his mouth to protest. "Now," the king said, and his voice carried an authority that moved people before their minds caught up with their legs. Chairs scraped, papers rustled. The chamber emptied in under a minute. The heavy doors groaned shut, and then it was just the two of them. Seren's heart hammered against her ribs. Being alone with the Alpha King had not been part of her plan. She had prepared for a legal battle, not a private audience. Her hand tightened on the edge of her satchel. Kaelin stood. The movement was fluid, unhurried, the way a predator rises when it has already decided what to do with its prey. He walked around the table, and each step closer made the air in the room feel heavier, thicker, charged with something she could not name. He stopped 6 feet from her, close enough that she could see the pale silver ring around his irises, close enough that his scent reached her, and it hit her like a wall. Cedar and iron, and something beneath both that her wolf recognized before her mind did. Her wolf, dormant her entire life, surged against the inside of her skin with a desperate recognition that made her gasp. No, she thought. Not possible. Kaelin's nostrils flared. For one unguarded second, something raw and shocked crossed his face before he locked it down behind the iron mask he wore like armor. He had felt it too. "What are you?" he asked, and his voice was rough in a way it had not been before. "A dirt farmer," Seren said. "Remember?" Their eyes locked. The air between them crackled with something ancient and involuntary and terrifying. Then he turned away, walked back to his chair, sat down. When he spoke again, his voice was perfectly controlled, perfectly cold, as if the last 30 seconds had not happened. "Your claim will be reviewed by the Crown's legal scholars," he said. "You will remain in the capital until the review is complete. Quarters will be arranged for you within the palace." Seren blinked. "Within the palace? Is that a problem?" His expression was flat, unreadable. 12 problems. 100. Starting with the fact that her wolf was still pressing against her skin, whining toward him like a compass needle pointing north. "No," she said. "No problem at all." "Good." He picked up a document from the table and began reading, dismissing her without words, without a gesture, without even the courtesy of looking at her when he ended the conversation. Seren gathered her satchel and walked to the door. Her legs were steady. Her hands were not. She made it halfway down the corridor before her legs gave out, and she sagged against the wall, trying to remember how to breathe. Her wolf was howling inside her, silent and desperate and certain of something Seren refused to accept. That man, that arrogant, dismissive, infuriating man who had told her to know her place, was her mate. And he had just locked her inside his palace. The quarters they gave her were nicer than anything she had ever slept in. A real bed with a mattress that did not sag in the middle. Clean linen that smelled of lavender. A window that overlooked the eastern grounds, the very lands she had spent 2 years healing. From up here, she could see the green spreading outward from the palace like a slow tide. Her work, her sweat, her bleeding hands. She should have felt victorious. Instead, she felt trapped. The legal review was expected to take several weeks. Lord Merrick's scholars were tearing apart every line of Article 12, looking for a loophole, an exception, anything that would let the Crown reclaim the territory without violating its own founding laws. Seren had read the Charter 17 times. There were no loopholes. But she understood that the law only mattered as much as the people in power wanted it to. She could not sit still. Waiting was not something her body knew how to do, not after 2 years of dawn to dusk labor. So she walked the palace grounds. She ran into the king 3 times in 4 days. Each encounter seemed accidental, but by the 3rd time, she stopped believing in coincidence. The first was in the corridor outside the library. He came around a corner and nearly walked into her. They both stopped. The air between them thickened instantly, and something inside her lunged forward so hard she had to clench her jaw. He stared at her for a beat too long, then brushed past without a word. The second was in the great hall during the evening meal. She had been placed at a far table, among the minor household staff and visiting clerks. She felt his gaze on her before she saw it. When she looked up, he was watching her from the head table with an expression that could have been irritation or something else entirely. He looked away the moment she caught him. The 3rd time was in the garden. She was kneeling beside a bed of ornamental roses on her 2nd morning, and when she pressed her hand into the soil, the wrongness hit her like a slap. It was the same sourness she had felt at the edges of her restoration work, the same recoiling, wounded quality in the earth. But here, at the center of the palace grounds, it was 100 times worse. The soil was not just sick, it was in agony. She could feel it pulsing beneath her palm, a slow, tortured rhythm like a heart that had been beating too long under unbearable strain. She pulled her hand back and stared at it. Her fingers were trembling. "The blight is not spreading inward," she whispered to herself. "It is spreading outward. From here." A shadow fell across her. Seren looked up to find Kalen standing on the gravel path, watching her with an expression she could not read. He was dressed simply today, no crown, no formal coat. Just a dark shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. It made him look younger, almost approachable, except for the bruised hollows beneath his eyes that she had not noticed in the council chamber. He looked exhausted. Not the ordinary tiredness of a man who worked long hours. Something deeper, something structural, as if the framework holding him together was coming apart slowly from the inside. "You are kneeling in my garden," he said. Seren stood, brushing soil from her knees. "Your garden is dying." Something flickered behind his eyes. "The gardeners say otherwise." "Your gardeners are looking at the flowers. I am looking at the roots." She held his gaze. "The soil beneath this palace is sicker than anything I found in the outer fields. Whatever is killing your kingdom, it started here." Neither of them spoke. The moment stretched. Kalen's jaw tightened. His hands, which had been loose at his sides, curled slowly into fists. "You are here for a legal review," he said quietly, "not to dig in my garden." "Someone should be digging in your garden. The rot beneath these beds will reach your foundations within a year." "That is not your concern." "It is literally my concern. It is the only thing I know how to do." His eyes held hers. She felt that pull again, the tension between them that made her skin go hot and her pulse quicken. His nostrils flared slightly, and she watched his throat work as he swallowed. "Stay away from the inner grounds," he said, and walked away. She did not stay away from the inner grounds. Over the following days, she mapped the damage beneath the palace the same way she had mapped the outer fields. She worked at night, when the gardeners were gone and the guards patrolled the outer walls. She moved quietly through the moonlit beds with her hands in the earth alert and restless in a way she could not explain. The pattern was unmistakable. The blight radiated outward from the palace in concentric rings, growing weaker the farther it spread. The epicenter was not the garden. It was beneath the palace itself. Beneath the throne room, if her calculations were right. And there was something else. Something that made her stomach turn with a dread she could not explain. The blight had a rhythm, a pulse, and it matched something she had felt before. Not in the soil. In him. She had felt it when he stood near her in the garden, when his scent wrapped around her, and something primal surged toward him. The same deep, tortured rhythm, the same slow agony. The land was dying because the king was dying. They were connected, bound together by whatever ancient bond tied an alpha to his territory. And something had poisoned that bond so thoroughly that the poison was flowing through him and into the earth like blood from an open wound. Seren sat back on her heels in the moonlit garden and covered her face with her hands. She had come here to claim land, to prove a point, to show a king that a nobody could outmaneuver a crown. She had not come here to save him, but her wolf knew what her mind refused to accept. The land she had healed, every green acre she had poured herself into, was connected to the same dying root system. If the king fell, the territory fell with him, and everything she had built would rot back to nothing. She could not save the land without saving the man, and the man did not want to be saved. She told him anyway. She had to. She found him in his study the next evening, alone for once. The room was dim, lit by a single lamp that threw long shadows across walls lined with maps and military correspondence. He sat behind a desk piled with documents, but he was not reading. He was staring at the wall with the unfocused gaze of a man who had been sitting in the same position for too long. "Your Majesty," Seren said from the doorway. He turned his head. The lamplight caught the hollows of his face, the shadows that had deepened even in the few days she had been here. He looked worse than when she had arrived, markedly worse. "It is late," he said. "What do you want?" "To tell you something you already know." She stepped inside and closed the door behind her. "The blight is coming from you." Kaelin did not flinch, did not look surprised. "You have known this whole time," Seren said, reading his stillness. "Yes." The word was flat, toneless. He stood slowly, the movement costing him visibly, and crossed to the window. "The bond between the Alpha and the territory has been corrupted. The land is rejecting me, and I am poisoning it in return." Seren's chest ached. "And you said nothing. You let your wardens burn in salt fields for 3 years knowing it would not help. Because telling them the truth would have meant admitting that their king is killing his own kingdom." He turned to face her. "Do you understand what that would do? The pacts, the border lords, the trade alliances. Everything holds together because they believe the Alpha bond is strong. If they learn it is broken, it does not matter what they believe. If you are dead," Seren said, her voice rising. His expression hardened. "Watch your tone." "No." She stepped closer. "You have been hiding this for 3 years. You are getting worse. I can see it in your face, in the way you move, in the way the soil screams when I put my hands in it. You are dying, and you are taking everything with you. And what would you have me do?" His voice cracked. Just barely, just for a second, but she heard it. The exhaustion underneath the authority, the despair beneath the control. "Let me help," Seren said. "I can feel the corruption in the soil. I can trace it to its source. If I can understand what broke the bond, I might be able to heal it." "No." The word came out sharp and immediate. "You have done enough. Your claim to the outer lands will be honored. I will instruct Merrick to cease the legal review. The territory is yours. Take it and go." She blinked. "You are giving me the land? Is that not what you wanted?" It was. It had been. Standing in that corridor after he had humiliated her, it was all she had wanted. But now the victory tasted wrong, like ash, like soil that had been burned too many times to remember what it was supposed to grow. "Not like this," she said. "Take the land, Miss Vielle." His voice was cold again, locked down, controlled. "Leave the palace. Do not come back." "Why?" she demanded. "Why would you give me everything I asked for and then push me away?" The words hung between them. Then he said, so softly she almost missed it, "Because you are the only good thing that has happened to this land in 3 years, And I will not let this sickness take you, too. The words hit her like a physical blow. She opened her mouth to argue, to fight, to tell him he was being a stubborn, self-destructive fool, but his face had closed off completely. The iron mask was back, and behind it, nothing she could reach. "A guard will escort you to the gate in the morning," he said. "Good night, Miss Vale." She left because she had no choice, but she did not sleep that night, and when she finally closed her eyes, her wolf howled with a grief that felt older than either of them. The escort arrived at dawn. 2 guards, polite but firm, who walked her through the palace corridors and out through the main gate without ceremony. She carried her satchel and the clothes she had arrived in and nothing else. Orla was waiting at the cottage. She took one look at Seren and put the kettle on. "He gave me the land," Seren said, sitting heavily at the kitchen table. "All of it. He is honoring the claim." Orla studied her face. "And yet you look like someone who lost everything." Seren pressed her fingers against her eyes. The ache in her chest had not lessened since she left the palace. If anything, it was growing, a steady, building pressure that made it hard to breathe. Her wolf was frantic, pacing inside her, clawing at the edges of her consciousness with an urgency that bordered on pain. "Something is wrong with me," she whispered. "Something is right with you," Orla corrected gently. "And that is far more frightening." Over the following days, the ache became unbearable. She went to the northern parcels, put her hands in the soil, tried to lose herself in the rhythm of restoration, but the earth felt different, muted, distant, like listening to music through a wall, and the blight was returning. She noticed it first on the eastern parcel, the very first piece of land she had healed. Clover near the boundary had gone yellow, then brown, then gray. The rot was creeping back in faster than before. "No," Seren whispered, kneeling in the dying clover. "I fixed this." Tareth found her sitting in the eastern field at dusk. "You have not eaten today," he said. "I am not hungry." He sat beside her. "The western parcel is showing signs of rot too." Seren closed her eyes. The blight was accelerating. That night, she collapsed in the cottage doorway. One moment she was walking, and the next her legs simply stopped working, and she was on the floor with Orla's hands on her face and Orla's voice calling her name from very far away. When she opened her eyes, she was in bed. Orla sat beside her, and the old woman's face was pale. "The bond," Orla said. "It is forming whether you want it to or not. The mate connection, once it begins, cannot be undone by distance. It can only be completed or it will consume you both." "He does not want me," Seren said, her voice cracking. "He is trying to protect you, child, the same way he is trying to protect his kingdom by hiding his sickness. He believes if he keeps everyone far enough away, the damage stops with him." Orla's eyes were fierce. "But he is wrong. The corruption is not his fault. It never was." Seren went still. "What do you mean?" Orla hesitated, and in that hesitation, Seren saw something she had never seen in her grandmother's face before. Fear. "The Draith bloodline carries an old curse," Orla said slowly. "The first Draith king made a pact with the land. The Alpha protects the territory, and the territory sustains the Alpha. But 3 generations ago, Kaelin's grandfather Aldrich broke the pact. He burned the Greenvale settlements. Hundreds of families, wolves and humans alike. He salted the earth behind him so nothing would ever grow there again." Seren's blood went cold. "The land remembers," Orla said. "The rot has been moving through the bloodline ever since, each king bearing more weight than the last. Kaelin's father lasted until his 50s. Kaelin is not yet 30, and it is already consuming him. The land's patience is running out." Orla gripped her hand. "But your bloodline has always been bound to the earth. If anyone can heal the wound between the Draith line and the territory, it is you." "And the mate bond?" Seren asked. Orla's expression softened. Is not a coincidence. The land chose you for him. The question is whether you will let it. Seren lay there in the dark. Her body ached. Her wolf ached. Every healed field she had poured her life into was dying again, and the man responsible for all of it was locked inside a palace, killing himself by inches rather than asking for help. He told me to leave, she said. Since when? Orla asked. Do you do what kings tell you? Seren closed her eyes, and for the first time in days, something that was not pain stirred inside her. She went back at midnight. No escort this time, no summons, no satchel full of documents, no legal arguments, just Seren in her work boots and her worn coat, walking through the dark streets of Thornhold toward the palace on the hill. The guards at the gate recognized her and exchanged uncertain glances. Miss Vale, one of them started, you are not authorized to— Tell the king I am here, she said, or do not. Either way, I am not leaving. They let her through. She suspected someone had quietly given orders when she found the study door unlocked and the hallway conspicuously empty. Headrick, the king's beta, stood at the end of the corridor. A broad, quiet man with a scar running from his left temple to his jaw. He will not be happy to see you, Hadrick said. I am aware. Hadrick studied her. Then his expression changed. The look of a man who had been waiting for someone to do the thing he could not do himself. He has not slept in 4 days, the beta said quietly. The corruption has reached his bones. He has ordered me to tell no one. How long does he have? Weeks, if we are fortunate. Days, if we are not. The word days hit her like a blow to the chest. She pushed past Headrick and opened the study door. Kalen was not at his desk. He was on the floor beside it, leaning against the wall with his legs stretched out in front of him. His shirt was damp with sweat. His skin, normally golden, had gone ashen. His breathing was shallow and uneven, and when he raised his head to look at her, his gray eyes were glassy with fever. I told you to leave, he said. His voice was a rasp, barely recognizable. Seren crossed the room and dropped to her knees in front of him. And I told you I am not very good at doing what kings tell me. He tried to glare at her, but the effort seemed to exhaust him. His head fell back against the wall. Stubborn woman. Stubborn man, she replied and pressed her hand against his forehead. The heat radiating from his skin made her flinch. But beneath the fever, something else pulsed. The corruption, the same dark pulse she had felt in the soil, running through him like poison through a river. I know about the curse, she said. I know about your grandfather. I know about the green veil. His eyes snapped open. For the first time, she saw genuine fear in them, not fear of her, fear of being known. Who told you? He demanded. My grandmother. She knows the old histories. She knows what Aldrich Draith did to the land and the families who lived on it. Seren held his gaze. And she knows why the corruption is killing you. Kalen said nothing. The fire crackled. Somewhere in the palace, a clock chimed the small hours of the morning. My grandfather was a monster, he said finally, his voice stripped bare. He wanted the green veil for its timber. The families living there would not relocate. So he burned them out. Every settlement, every field. He salted the earth so they could never return. His hands clenched in his lap. My father inherited the crown and the guilt. He spent his reign trying to atone, but the land did not want atonement. It wanted justice. And now it falls to you, Seren said softly. I have been king for 6 years. I have tried everything. Healers, shamans, old rituals. I went to the Green Veil myself and stood on the scorched earth and begged. His voice cracked. It did not answer. Seren reached for his hand. He flinched at the contact, but she did not let go. His fingers were burning with fever, trembling slightly. "It did not answer because you were asking the wrong question," she said. "You are asking for forgiveness. The land does not forgive. It does not hold grudges either. It heals or it dies. Those are the only two options." He looked at her, really looked at her, with the mask gone and the walls down, and nothing between them but fever and truth. "You are telling me there is a way," he said. "I am telling you that I have spent 2 years healing soil that everyone said was dead. I have rebuilt what your wardens destroyed. I have coaxed life from ground that had not seen green in over a decade." She squeezed his hand. "I know how to do this, but I cannot do it from outside your walls. Siren." Her name in his mouth, the first time he had used it, sent a current through her that settled at the base of her spine. "If you stay, the curse will reach you. It has already started. I can feel it in the bond." "So you do acknowledge the bond?" she said. He closed his eyes. "I have acknowledged nothing. You just called me by my name for the first time. That is not the same as... You are running a fever that could kill a normal wolf. You are sitting on the floor of your own study because you cannot make it to a chair, and you are arguing semantics with a dirt farmer at 2 in the morning." She leaned closer. "Just admit it." His eyes opened. They were bright with fever and something else. Something desperate and aching that he had clearly been fighting for longer than she knew. "If I admit it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I cannot protect you from what I am." "I do not need your protection," Siren said. "I need you to stop dying." The silence that followed was so fragile she was afraid to breathe. Then his hand turned in hers. His fingers laced through hers, tight and trembling and certain. He pulled her closer, and she went, until her forehead rested against his, and she could feel his breath hot and unsteady against her lips. "I am afraid," he admitted. The words were so quiet she felt them more than heard them. "I know," she whispered back. "So am I." He kissed her. It was desperate and clumsy and tasted like fever, and when his hand came up to cradle her jaw, his fingers shook against her skin. She kissed him back, and felt the bond between them flare like a struck match, bright and fierce, and irreversible. Something locked into place inside her. Something that had been searching found its anchor. When they broke apart, his breathing was ragged and his eyes were wet. "Stay," he said. Just that. One word, broken open. Siren pressed her lips against his forehead. "I am not going anywhere." She held him through the rest of the night, his hand gripping hers. His fever raged and broke and raged again. She talked to him the way she talked to the soil, low and steady and certain. She told him about the clover breaking through on the 23rd day, and the earthworms returning, and the slow, stubborn miracle of dead ground choosing to live. Somewhere before dawn, his breathing changed. The rigid tension left his body. His hand went slack in hers. He was asleep. Siren watched his face in the thin light. The hard lines softened. The pain temporarily eased. She pressed her palm flat against the stone floor beside them and felt the earth beneath the palace shudder. Not with pain this time, with recognition. The land knew she was here. And somewhere deep beneath the foundations, in the wounded root of everything, something stirred. But as the first gray light crept through the window, Siren felt something else, a resistance. Not from the soil, and not from the king. From the corruption itself. It pushed back against her presence with a cold, deliberate intelligence that made her blood freeze. The curse was not just a wound. It was alive. And it knew she had come to kill it. Siren woke with the taste of ash in her mouth, and the king still asleep beside her. His breathing was shallow but steady, and the fever had broken sometime before dawn. She could feel the bond between them now, a living thread of warmth connecting her chest to his, pulsing in time with his heartbeat. But beneath that warmth, the other thing remained. The cold intelligence she had sensed the night before. It had retreated, pulled back like an animal assessing a new threat, and it was watching. She needed to find the source, not the history, the physical root. The place where the corruption lived and the wound in the earth that had never been allowed to heal. She knew where it was. She had known since the night she mapped the palace gardens and felt the blight radiating outward from beneath the throne room. Hadric found her in the corridor outside the study. "The king is resting," Seren said. "Do not wake him." The beta nodded. "What do you need?" "Access to whatever is beneath the throne room." His expression tightened. "There is a vault beneath the foundations. It has been sealed since Aldrich's time. No one goes down there. I need to go down there." He turned and walked without a word. She followed. The vault was accessed through a passage behind the throne room, hidden behind a tapestry so old its colors had faded to gray. Stone steps spiraled downward into darkness. The air grew colder with each step, and the smell hit her halfway down. Not rot, exactly. Something older. Something that smelled like grief given physical form. Hadric stopped at the bottom. "I will wait here." The way he said it told her he could not go farther. The darkness was too dense for anyone without her gift to endure. The vault was larger than she expected. A stone chamber with a low ceiling and weeping walls. In the center, set into the floor, was a circle of scorched earth. Literally burned black, the stone cracked from heat that must have been tremendous. Growing from that scorched circle, pushing up like fingers reaching from a grave, were roots. Thick, dark, twisted roots that pulsed with the same sickly rhythm she had felt in the king's fevered skin. They spread outward in every direction, threading through the foundations, reaching toward the palace above like veins carrying poison to a heart. This was the wound. Aldrich Draith had brought scorched earth back from the Green Vale and buried it beneath his throne as a monument to his own power. And the land had been screaming ever since. Seren knelt and placed both hands flat on the stone. The corruption surged. Cold raced up her arms. Her vision went white. Her wolf howled. And then she was somewhere else. She was standing in a field of ash. Gray sky, gray ground, gray air. Nothing grew. Nothing moved. The silence was the kind that exists only in places where life has been deliberately erased. The Green Vale, or what the Green Vale had become in the memory of the land. Figures stood at the edges of the field. Hundreds of them. Families with children. Elders with weathered faces. They watched her with eyes that held no anger, only exhaustion. The bone-deep weariness of wounds left open for 3 generations. "I see you," Seren whispered. The figures leaned toward her, the way a plant leans toward light. "You cannot heal this." Kaelin stood behind her, diminished, hollowed, wearing the faces of 3 generations of guilt. "You did not do this," Seren said. "It does not matter. The land does not distinguish between the hand that struck and the hands that followed." "No," Seren said firmly. "That is the corruption talking. The logic of a wound that has festered so long it has forgotten what healing feels like." She turned back to the figures. She could feel them through her hands, through her bond with the earth. Their pain was real. Their loss was real. The Green Veil had been destroyed, and nothing could undo that. But destruction was not the end of the story. "I was abandoned as an infant," Seren said, and her voice carried across the silent field. "Left on a doorstep by a mother who believed she had nothing to offer me. For most of my life, I thought that meant I was worthless. That I had to earn the right to exist by being useful, by proving over and over that I deserved the space I took up." She looked at the figures, at Kaelin, at the ash beneath her feet. "But that is not how it works. You do not earn the right to live. You do not pay for someone else's sin with your own destruction. and you do not heal a wound by keeping it open forever. She knelt and pressed her hands into the ash. I cannot undo what was done to you. No one can. But I can offer what should have been offered 3 generations ago. Not forgiveness, not atonement. Just someone willing to kneel in the dirt and do the work. The corruption surged against her like a wall of ice. It did not want healing. Wounds this old sometimes didn't. They became their own identity. Without the pain, what remained? Life, Seren thought. What remains is life. Kalen's hand found her shoulder. He knelt beside her, pressed his own hands into the ash. His guilt was still enormous, but it was no longer paralyzing. He was not asking for forgiveness anymore. He was offering presence. I am sorry, he said to the figures. Not as a king, as a man. I cannot return what my family took. But I can promise that no one will ever salt this earth again. The woman at the front, carrying a child on her hip, looked at them both for a long time. Then she looked down at their hands in the ash. She nodded, small, barely perceptible, but Seren felt it in the earth like a key turning in a lock. The ground shuddered, the ash cracked, and from the split, impossibly, a single green shoot pushed through. The corruption screamed. It thrashed and clawed at them, at the fragile green life pushing through the dead ground. But the shoot kept growing, and behind it, another, and another. The figures began to fade, not violently, gently, the way morning fog lifts when the sun breaks through. The woman with the child looked back once, and something like peace crossed her face. Then they were gone. Seren opened her eyes. She was in the vault, on her knees, hands pressed against the scorched circle. The dark roots were withering, crumbling to powder. The pulse of corruption was fading, and where the scorched earth had been, a crack had formed, and from it, thin and impossibly real, a single green tendril was growing. Kalen was beside her, on his knees, his hands over hers. His face was wet with tears, but his eyes were clear. The ashen cast to his skin was gone. Is it over? He asked. Seren looked at the green tendril, at the crumbling roots, at the color returning to the walls. She felt the earth beneath the palace sigh with a relief that vibrated through her bones. The wound is closing, she said. The rest will take time. He pulled her against his chest and held her so tightly she could barely breathe. She did not mind. Between them, the bond hummed with something that felt like the first warm day after a long, merciless winter. The land did not heal overnight. Neither did the king. Wounds that deep required patience and a love that showed up every day even when progress was invisible. But the blight retreated. By the time the first frost came, wildflowers had begun to grow in the palace gardens without anyone planting them. Seren still spent most of her days in the fields. Kalen learned to find her there when council meetings ran long. He would walk out to whatever parcel she was working and sit beside her without a word. You are getting dirt on your coat, she told him once. It is my coat, he replied. It is a very expensive coat. Then I will buy another one. She looked at him, at the color in his skin, at the way his shoulders had finally learned to drop, and a tenderness that still caught her off guard swelled through her. On the morning of their bonding ceremony, Seren stood at the window and looked out at the land. Hundreds of acres of living green, stretching from the palace in every direction. Land that had been dead. Land she had healed with her own hands. Kalen came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. Nervous? He asked. Terrified. He pressed his lips against her temple. You faced down a generational curse in an underground vault and you are terrified of a ceremony? The curse could not judge me for my dress. He laughed, and the sound was warm and real. You look beautiful. She turned in his arms and looked up at him. The man who had told her to know her place. The man whose land she had healed, whose heart she had ended up holding in her dirt-stained hands. "I know my place," she said softly. He smiled. "And where is that?" Seren looked at the green fields, at the palace surrounded by her land, at the man who had once dismissed her and now held her like she was the most important thing in his world. "Right here," she said,